All right, here we go. I hope you're ready. I'm going to go pretty fast through this, so please feel free to pause, stop, go back through the book. There's a lot going on here, but we are going, and that is rebuilding the nation after the Civil War. We talked a little bit in class about just the life-changing injuries. So I said, don't count out these wounded. Wounded is a big deal, and look at these total casualties from the war. 618,000 plus. This is the most in U.S. history, and of course it's because we're fighting each other, but this is going to make it really hard to put the Union back together again. 4 main problems we have to deal with. First one, what do we do with all these people that, took up arms against the United States? Do we try them for treason? Do we pardon them? What do we do there? Second off, what do we do with the 11 states that claimed they walked out of the Union? What kinds of things do we need to do to make sure that they don't do that again? And also, what do we need to do to make sure they're states again and get representatives in Congress? We've got over 4 million people that were just enslaved, who by law weren't allowed to read or write or participate in society. So how do we transition those people to become functioning members and citizens of society, and also guarantee that they have equal rights? That's going to be a tough one. And then the last one is, how do we rebuild the massive amount of damage, especially in the South, especially in Virginia, Sherman's March? The Southerners can't do it, and the Northerners, many of them don't want to pay for that. They kind of feel like that was their own problem. So we've got 2 different plans here. We've got Lincoln's 10% plan, and this is what he's throwing out there even before the war's over. This is when it's clear the Confederacy is going to lose. Lincoln starts talking about this in very late winter, early spring 1865. He really feels like we should just move forward. Let's not play the blame game. Remember, Lincoln never believed secession was possible, so because of that, he said we don't need to make them jump through all these crazy hoops to become a state again. So as long as the former Confederates swore an oath of future loyalty, they would be pardoned, saying nothing about the past. So again, not dragging their name through the mud. Let's not point fingers. He did say some Confederate leaders should be charged with treason, but instead of being killed, they should be banned from public office. So he's definitely got a more reasonable, less vindictive approach than other members in the Republican Party. So his proposal said as long as 10% of eligible voters, remember eligible voters were white males, so 10% of white males in the South, that's a relatively small number of people, as long as they ban slavery and secession and take this oath, then they can elect representatives to Congress. He also wanted the Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau is going to be this group that he really pushed for, and this actually will happen. It's going to be teachers and people who can rebuild things, and doctors, and they're going to go to the South and help people, not just the African Americans, learn how to read and write, but among the destitute, the poor who have lost everything. Let's rebuild roads. Let's rebuild hospitals. Let's just try to fix the infrastructure. So very much a hands-on government here, very much the federal government stepping in, and that's kind of his thing. The radical Republicans, not a fan of Lincoln's plan. They had their own plan. This was called the Wade-Davis bill, and keyword right there, punish. They wanted to punish the South. They wanted to make sure that the South knew they were conquered territories. And they also wanted to keep Republican control of the House and of Congress. They really were upset with Lincoln. They felt like he was somewhat selling out here and being way too easy on them. And the viewpoint of them was they definitely secede, and they need to be treated like conquered territories. So here's what they wanted. They wanted a much stronger oath, and the oath was past and future loyalty. It was definitely a lot more you started this than what Lincoln wanted. A lot of blame there on the South. 50% of eligible voters have to take this much harsher oath. So it's definitely more than what Lincoln wanted. They did have to ratify the new 13th Amendment, which banned slavery. They did have to ban former Confederates from office, slavery, and secession. In reality, neither plan was used. Lincoln actually pocket vetoed the Wade-Davis plan, so which is just when you let it expire, you don't sign it. And with Lincoln's assassination, his plan unfortunately was not used. Can you see why the South was really upset at John Wilkes Booth, by the way? Because Lincoln was really the best friend the South had here, and without his voice, we're going to see the more radical wing of the Republican Party, aka the radical Republicans, are going to push for punishing, and it is going to lead to a lot of bitterness. So who knows what might have happened here if Lincoln had been around, but unfortunately he's not. This picture, it's just interesting to see how much the presidency ages you. Here's Lincoln in 1860. Here he is 5 years later, and I think you can definitely tell a difference. Look at his eyes, just look how sunken his cheeks are. That is not an easy job. And And there's John Wilkes Booth, and this, of course, is Ford's Theater, where Lincoln was killed just 5 days after the Civil War ends. So we lose a tragedy. We just lose such a great leader there. It's such a tragedy. And also, like I said, the South was furious with Booth. I think Booth thought he'd be a hero. And most Southern leaders were like, you idiot, what did you just do? So who takes over after Lincoln? Pretty much the worst guy for that moment. We couldn't have really picked anybody more abrasive or just really wrong for that particular moment in history. And it's Lincoln's vice president, Andrew Johnson, who was actually one of the war Democrats. So Lincoln technically picked a guy from the other party to be his running mate in 1864. Like Lincoln, he had really humble beginnings. Unlike Lincoln, he's a Democrat, and he's from Tennessee. Well, remember, Tennessee did secede in the Civil War. He didn't follow his state. So that's something that's going to make pretty much everybody mad, because Northerners don't like him because he's from Tennessee. The radical Republicans hate him because he's a Democrat, and Southerners don't like him because he didn't, quote-unquote, follow his state. So he really didn't have a friend anywhere. Not to mention he was known as being pretty tactless, not really, thinking before he said things, and also he's going to be really veto-happy and be seen as an obstructionist for any progress. What does he do? Well, he does recognize Southern state governments, even though most of them failed to say slavery was bad. He leaned towards sympathizing with slave owners, and that's going to make the radical Republicans even more furious. A lot of the black codes, the really harsh, unfair laws targeting these freedmen, he's going to support those. He's going to pardon former Confederate leaders if they just ask him nicely. So he's really making people in Congress mad. Not to mention, he vetoes a bill to enlarge the Freedmen's Bureau. That was Lincoln's baby, Lincoln's idea. And he vetoes a civil rights bill that would have given slaves citizenship. These are things that are going to make guys like Thaddeus Stevens in the Republican Party just absolutely furious and out for blood, and they want to get him out. And they're looking for him to make a mistake. What does he do that Lincoln would have liked? Well, he certainly makes Reconstruction go quickly. We see former Confederate leaders are sitting in Congress by January 1866, and all but 3 Southern states are readmitted also by that year, by that month. And but he definitely slowed things down with vetoes. And even the more independents and the more moderate people in the United States start to look at him and kind of say, oh, this guy's not good. He's definitely no Lincoln. To be fair, I don't know that we ever would find another Lincoln, but you can see why this guy is really just not the right guy for this moment in history. What ends up happening here in Reconstruction is pretty much what Lincoln didn't want to happen, and that is these 11 states were treated like conquer territories. So they're divided into 5 military districts. Troops are sent. They're marching up and down the street. It's a reminder to the South of what happened. Military tribunals are acting as courts while they're being reconstructed, and it just doesn't feel quite as a smooth transition as I think Lincoln would have wanted. Very heavily based on the military. The other thing, though, we are going to see the 14th and 15th Amendments will be ratified. That's good. They're going to be ignored. That's bad, but they are there. So we see some progress. 13th Amendment, that was kind of the quote-unquote easy one to get here. That's the one that banned slavery, and this is February 1865. This is before the war's over. Lincoln's confident, though, that he's going to win, so that's why he finally does this, which really takes it up a notch from what the Emancipation Proclamation did. 14th Amendment is one that's tremendously important, and we're going to continue to see its importance all the way through today. But this one does a few things. It's going to make sure all former slaves are now citizens, and it's also going to say states cannot deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That means nobody can come and take your stuff and take your life without due process of law. It's not really going to be followed, though. We'll get there. The 15th Amendment, the last one to be ratified here, is allowing voting rights. You can't take away voting rights on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So if you used to be a slave, or if you are African American, you cannot discriminate. Notice something's missing. Gender is missing. Women suffragettes are going to be pretty fired up about that. They wanted to see gender added in there, but it won't be yet. So this allows all black males to vote. Okay, now we get to Johnson's impeachment. And his impeachment it's all really this bitterness that we see after the Civil War. Why is he impeached? Well, really, we know that he hadn't made many friends through this stuff, but he does violate a law, the Tenure of Office Act. So that's the gotcha moment that the Republicans were hoping for, and they get it. Here's what the law says. The president can't remove a cabinet officer he had appointed without a 2/3 vote of the Senate. Who does he remove? This guy. He fires Secretary of War Edwin Stanton on February 21st, 1868. Hey, that's my daughter's birthday. I never realized that. How about that? So he actually, then the House votes to impeach him. Now remember, impeachment is not kicking out. Impeachment is the trial. So the House votes to have the trial, and the Senate acquits him by one vote. You need a 2/3 vote to convict him. It was very close. So he is not removed. What does impeachment do? Well, the radical Republicans are almost seen as being kind of witch hunters, and moderates are kind of disgusted with the way that this whole thing went down. Republicans will then pick Ulysses S. Grant for presidency in 1868, and he does win over a slight majority over the Democrat there. But what we start to see is that the nation starts to lose interest in Reconstruction. People start getting wrapped up, and I think you see this anytime we're in a war. After a few years, people start forgetting what they're doing, and why it's important. And especially with Reconstruction, it's very expensive, and Northerners just don't want to pay for it anymore. Now, what I want you to think about is how is the New South new, and how is it not really anything different than the old? Well, we do have new local governments. The radical Republicans are going to be propping up these governments. So the Republican Party will start to spread into the South, much to the dismay of the Democrats. And the new governments here are made up of freed blacks, scalawags, and carpetbaggers. What the heck is a scalawag and a carpetbagger? A scalawag is an old Scottish term, and it means anybody who sympathized with the Union during the war. So these are the ones, people in the South who were kind of rooting for the Union, and when they won, they were kind of like, ha, 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 So most Southern Democrats hated them. This is actually a carpetbag right there. What's a carpetbagger? Here's a carpetbagger right there. Carpetbagger is somebody who came from the North into the South to help with Reconstruction, and some of them had good intentions, and some of them were just there to maybe make some money, get some political favors. So there were some corrupt carpetbaggers for sure. African Americans, we do see playing a role, at least in the beginning, in governments at pretty much all levels. They were in the state conventions, they were in the state legislatures. We had 14 elected to the House and 2 elected to the Senate. That will change, though, as soon as Reconstruction ends. Economics change, not that much. What they do is they take the old plantations and they divide them up. And then they divide them up into these smaller little lands that could be rented out. Sharecropping and tenant farming are the way that they would basically rent these lands. So sharecroppers would pay their rent in crops. And tenant farming, you would pay in crops and get a little bit money back, but still, neither one of these are going to be professions where you're making any money. You're still essentially tied to your land. And a lot of times African Americans, because they either couldn't read well or were still learning how to read, were signing these really unfair work contracts that were pretty much tying them to the land. So it's not slavery, but I tell you what, it's not that much far up. We'll also see poor whites will be sharecroppers and tenant farmers. Because remember, not everybody in the South was a rich plantation owner. Positives and negatives in the new Southern governments, well, property qualifications for voting are lifted completely, whatever was left. Jail for debt was lifted, because pretty much everybody was in debt. Public schools are going to really start to take hold in the South in a way that they hadn't before, and roads, hospitals, orphanages, bridges are rebuilt due to the Freedmen's Bureau. Negatives, they got to borrow this money. They're going to be, continuing to spiral into debt. Property taxes are very high. There's just a chance for a lot of graft, which is a fancy word for corruption. And a lot of Southerners are angry and they want a scapegoat. And the African Americans are unfortunately going to be that scapegoat. They're going to be, for many Southerners, the reason why their lives are so hard. And they're going to see a lot of resentment. They're going to also see that the Republican Party is obviously more attracted to the African Americans are more attracted to the Republican Party than the Democrats for sure at this point, because the Republicans are the party of Lincoln, a party of the 13th Amendment. So the Southern white Democrats are going to start to resent that, and you're going to see that in the Ku Klux Klan, which is formed in Tennessee. They're going to use intimidation factors, so they're going to get around that 14th and 15th Amendment, because the 14th, 15th Amendment only work if you have presidents and people willing to enforce them, and without that, it's not going to happen. And even though we will see a little bit, we'll see Congress acting with some force acts that do put elections under federal supervision and troops sent to where the Klan was strong. Make no mistake about it, when this Reconstruction ends and these troops are not marching up and down the streets of many Southern cities, you can kiss the 14th and 15th Amendments goodbye, literally, until almost 1965. So it's going to be something I think that we can admit is really a failure in Reconstruction when you look at civil rights.